What was your motivation to write Rat?
I've worked in the voluntary sector for sort of 20 years before, well, not before coming a writer at the same time, there's been a writer most of it. And I'd worked with organisations that work with families that were involved in the care system. My last sort of couple of jobs before I became a full-time writer, one of them was working with organisations that supported the families of prisoners. And I've also sort of been in sort of prisons as well. So there's a part of me, I suppose, is quite political. It's about the way that those voices get lost. It's the impact on imprisonment for children. So that was part of it. But the second part is also about community and about a lot of the prejudice and stereotypes about working class communities and people who live in sort of blocks and estates. And having lived quite a lot of my life on blocks and estates, I know that people do pull together to help each other. So it sort of brought together sort of two threads, the side of working in prisons and with families of prisoners, but also the side of living on an estate at one point as a new single mum, and my neighbours just supported me. And one of my neighbours actually used to sort of be a dumpster diver, so his flat was just full of all these things that he found in skips. So we got new blenders and juices and a lovely sort of gilt mirror that's on the, because people just throw stuff away, you know. So a lot of it's come from elements of real life.
I love that feeling of community that Al suddenly chances upon in the book. It's brilliant. But it's not just the stuff, is it? It's the generosity of spirit and the warmth. Yeah. He's kind of welcomed into that sort of family unit, because that's sort of what it is, isn't it?
It is. And I think, you know, the neighbours that used to be on my block, and there used to be another young guy who lived below us who was in his 20s and I think was a heroin addict, and they used to sort of, again, they used to take over Sunday lunch to him, you know, anybody was welcome. So really, and I think those stories get completely lost because a lot of people who have very little themselves do give a lot to other people. It's that resource that we have within our communities that just doesn't often get recognised.
Yeah. So Al forms, he's got a very close relationship obviously with his rats. Why did you choose rats to be his closest companions?
I have no idea because I'm terrified. We lived somewhere once and we had a mouse infestation and one jumped out of a box of Cheerios at me and I've never eaten Cheerios since. I don't know. I think I'm actually quite frightened. I don't like them. I've got a bit of a phobia about them, but I know people who do. And it was quite funny. When I decided I was going to do the rats, I put out a call on sort of Facebook to friends, like, does anybody know anything about rats? And it was quite surprising, the people who had pet rats. I got loads of info. In a sense, it was like a challenge. It's also about rats are sort of, I mean, except, you know, in some cases they are quite misunderstood creatures, they are quite intelligent, and it's about that sense of being a sort of loner and being misunderstood. So I thought it's also quite a good sort of metaphor for Al.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because they're like I know lots of people do have rats as pets, but they're not sort of the fluffy bunny kind of cuddly hamster sort of pets that you naturally are drawn to. So it's that bond, like you say, of the sort of the people who are misunderstood, the creatures who are misunderstood, and the ones that sometimes like sort of left on the outside, or you form an opinion of them and often never get past that opinion.
Absolutely. And I just, in a sense, sort of thinking of my own, you know, I used to be part of a sort of reading group and we used to take turns going to each other's sort of houses, and one of the sort of participants, she had pet rats and she promised that she wouldn't let them out of her cage, but she did at the end. And they're kind of climbing up her arms and I just thought, the sort of terror I felt. But it's illogical because these animals weren't going to harm me, you know, all of those things. And again, it's just about how we feel to certain people. Sometimes it's absolutely illogical. We have this complete prejudice and this sort of gut reaction. And I think, you know, to young boys like Al who are just angry and struggling, have not really had a good start, you know, there's a lot of I suppose prejudice and stereotypes around those sort of angry young boys.
So if you were to meet Al, what advice would you like to give him?
I would say to him, I suppose in a sense, a lot of young people and underrepresented young people, that your voice really matters, that how you feel is important. that you are resilient, you're survived, you know, that also maybe to find a way that you can express yourself, you know, write poetry or record it, or you know, kick the hell out of football or something. But also that people really do care. And people struggle to show it, but you know, you are seen and people do care about you.
So what do you imagine Al is in the future? What do you hope is Al's future?
I'm supposed to be realistic. He probably wouldn't do that well at school, because school has such a narrow curriculum that's only, you know, it's only a certain set of young people can squeeze within that curriculum. It doesn't, particularly if they're cutting down on things like arts and music and sports. It's that, you know, league table sort of curriculum. But I think there'll be someone in his school who really sees the good in him. So it could possibly be something around drama. It could be something around arts. It could be something about carpentry. He will find something. It might be about animal welfare, actually. You know, he might get involved in something that involves, you know, an animal sanctuary or supporting animals, and he will find his passion. So I think there'll be someone who will invest time in him, and he will find his passion. I think his mum will sort herself out. I think she's kind of had this wake up call and her mother will find a way to give her more support as well. But my hopes for her is that, you know, there are organisations that work with women who are struggling, and they will find, and she will find them, and she will come into her own as well. So I'm optimistic. There is a safety net, but it's how you deal sort of with the emotion and just the pure everyday poverty of it, I think, that they have to come through.
Al's got he's got a bond with his sister now as well, Plum, hasn't he?
Yeah.
Which we hope that will sort of underpin a lot of good in his future.
Absolutely. And I think it's a theme, I suppose, that comes up in quite a lot of my books around, you know, personally, I've never lived in what's considered a normal family. You know, my first family was a foster family for 4 years. It was lovely, you know. And then when I went back to live with my mum had met my stepdad, who's Italian, and he's lovely as well. But he, you know, it's funny because he always calls me his daughter, but people like look at him. He's very short and very, shall we say, very fair skinned for an Italian. So we look nothing alike. And I've got my two brothers are his two sons, but they're my brothers, you know. And then he was married before and got an older son who's in fireman in Florida, you know. So we're kind of this crooked family. But all my families and all my books are, because that's my normality. You know, never living in a family where we're all the same colour. Never living with, you know, mum and dad who are married. So I think, you know, again, it's drawing on those strengths of different parts of our families. That families aren't necessarily standard traditional nuclear family. Families go beyond that, and you find your connections.
Yeah. And actually, for Al, his family sort of expands beyond his blood relations, doesn't it? In the book, which is something he'd never thought of before, I think.
I think he didn't feel that he could be loved, really. You know, I think he always thought himself as a problem kid, you know, because I suppose if you're going in and out of foster care and then bouncing around and your dad doesn't want, because he's got, you know, his new family, you know, what that's going to do to your self-esteem and your self-identity is really sort of harsh. So, yes, he finds out this wider family on the block where he lives who really genuinely care about him.
What do you hope students will take away after reading Rat?
I just hope it's a good story. I mean, initially that's what it's there for. You know, I want them to really care about Al. I really want them to do. I think, you know, loads of young people struggle in their lives. I want them to feel it's an optimistic story. I want any of them who've experienced any element of those stories to feel seen. You know, in other sort of books I've done for young adults, I have characters who've been in, who've had parents in prison, and my own biological father was in prison for a month for forging a cheque, which subsequently meant he couldn't be a nurse anymore, and he eventually became homeless and sort of died on the streets. And I talk very openly about this in schools, particularly in some areas, because there are so many young people who experience family bereavement, experience the care system, experience parents in prison. And I have actually had young people come up to me after events say, oh, my dad's in prison, you know, because actually, you know, you hold so much of your back sometimes in case you're judged, but they actually feel seen. So there's something about, you know, about feeling seen, about people understanding what they're going through. And for young people who haven't experienced that, to actually give a sort of human face to those situations as well. But actually, this is, you know, people who are on benefits aren't benefit scroungers. It's not easy in any sort of way. People make mistakes and go to prison, but it's not holiday camp. You know, these things, you know, people do make mistakes and really try to rectify them, but it's really not, you know, easy. So it's kind to sort of bust a few of those stereotypes as well.
What part of the novel was the easiest or to write, and why? And was there a bit that was the hardest?
I think for me, I always start with character. So I kind of knew Al, I knew his situation, I kind of knew where he's living, because I've got no geographical imagination. So I have to sort of base things on actual places. So yeah, that's the street, that's the park I used to go to. So that part was, so yeah, that's based on that supermarket where that guy follows you around. Yep, know that one. So, you know, those bits were easy, and I knew well. I knew also that it had to be a sort of happy ending. I knew there'd be an altercation with a neighbour. The two, Pete and Ty, who support him, are based on sort of my neighbours. So that was kind of easy, that coming together. And I sort of had a sense of what the arc was. That sometimes just filling in those details. And I also knew there had to be a rat funeral, because somebody I asked about rats was telling me about how much that, you know, rat might realise another one's died. That, oh my gosh, I have to use that. You know, so I had to sort of squeeze in a lot of the rat info that people kindly gave me. A lot of free books I've got to give people. I think. But I think for me, it's always about how, particularly for these type of books, how you simplify. I've got a habit of all my books of trying to cram in too much. So it's really working out what is the arc, because you can't have an happy ending like this. That's disingenuous, but you have to have optimism, and you have to have
it's a hopeful ending, isn't it? More than a happy ending.
Yeah. Yeah,
and I think that's often the best way with stories, that, you know, like you say, things where everything just ties off neatly and is all wrapped up, you're just left feeling that's not real life, and this is real life that you've written about. So
absolutely, yeah,
it's not going to be plain sailing for Al from going forwards, but there's hope.
No, not at all. But I suppose, you know, the art, what I wanted him to be was just less lonely at the end of it. And I suppose in the end, that was what I was thinking. I wanted him to feel less lonely. I want him to feel, you know, I suppose lovable, really, and that people do care and to accept that, I think.
Yeah. That opening scene, the opening chapters, where you really get a sense of what it's like to not have a full stomach and not have, you know, enough. That, I think that as a starting point brings home sort of his situation really, really starkly.
Absolutely, you know, and I think it's sort of been highlighted recently during lockdown, you know, particularly, obviously, you know, some by Marcus Rashford, but it's always existed before, and work that the Trust have done about just, there was a lot of food poverty. There was a lot of children, a lot of parents who are struggling to feed their children. And I think people like to sort of make out it's such an, you know, irresponsible thing. It doesn't mean that you don't want to, but it's sometimes really, really hard. And I sort of kind of wanted to sort of demonstrate this isn't deliberate neglect. It's just really hard sometimes. And there used to be at my daughter's first primary school, you know, a breakfast club, and there were such fantastic things, you know, for a child to come and have breakfast. And I was actually doing an event just before lockdown in February in a secondary school in Allsop in Liverpool, like really, really big secondary school. And at first break, the canteen is open, and they have you know, serve hot toast and tea. And they're saying that sometimes this is like the first hot thing the children have eaten. And in a library, they have like just big food boxes that they give out to parents, you know. So that food poverty and that hunger is an incredibly real thing.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for students who want to write something?
Yes, I mean, firstly, literally just write. Or record, or, you know, this is about words and stories. So how it comes out and how you do that is entirely up to you, because this is totally different from school writing. This is just about your voice and the way that you tell stories. So if you want to, you know, record it on a phone recorder, if you want to, I do little mind maps, make circles and do lists of things. At one point, I see if I can do this out, making everything topple. I bought this book, which was sort of like a last year's diary, so it's really cheap, and tried to write random things on each page to give me prompts. So I think, what if your child was a full-time elf impersonator? things. Another's like the girl with the glowing hair in Sainsbury's, and what would you do if what if your butterflies really were tied up because of like the Prince song? What if you had to carry your breath in a bag on your back? You know. So I sort of just write random prompts, and even that is just writing. You don't even have to write anymore. You know, you can write it on index cards, scraps of paper, just like, what if? I spent a lot of time listening when I was in London to conversations on buses, not deliberately. People speak so loud. And suddenly you'd kind of get this scrap and want to know what the rest of the story was around it. I'd say if you start something, you honestly don't have to finish. It really doesn't matter. You started something, even if it's a paragraph. Spelling doesn't matter. That's what technology is there for. It's just whatever way that you communicate is absolutely fine, because that is storytelling. This isn't a school test. If you're seriously into writing, I would suggest asking a librarian or English teacher if they would set up a little writing club after school or in lunch breaks, where you all have prompts and then you sort of write little bits and encourage each other. There are also competitions. So for instance, if you're Muslim, there's a Young Muslim Writers competition. Wicked, the musical, do a massive annual writing competition. The BBC do various ones. You know, so there's kind of a lot of those, and you know, enter them. And even if you don't win, you've actually got a piece of writing that's there and that you could work with. And also, writing is so many different things. It's manga. It's doing sort of role play games on, you know, with on computer coding and all of those things. It's so many different things. So don't think it's writing a hefty book or a short story. It can be absolutely anything.
It's just having a go, isn't it? Having a go and finding what you enjoy.
But also it's finding your voice. It's because I think, you know, the curriculum we have at school is still the same curriculum that I had, you know, growing up loads of years ago. And what it does is it just kind of, you know, something recently saying that, you know, a lot of young people grow up, go to school, leave school without having studied a book by a Black or Asian writer. But I think it's beyond that. It's also class. It's around, you know, I remember reading Sam Sullivan's Lonely London. It's written in a sort of Trinidadian, a sort of literary kind of dialect, or reading James Kelman's How Late It Was, How Late, written in a sort of, I think it's Glaswegian sort of dialect. And you think, you know, we have so many different voices, but if we absorb what we have at school, with, in a sense, we only have certain voices, which is either historic white guys or sort of literary white guys and the occasional women, you know. And, you know, our voices are so different and they say so much. And I think for young people, you need to know that your voice is incredibly important. It's unique, that your viewpoint on the world is really, really important. And each one of you can tell me something about the way you see the world that I won't know. And that's why, you know, their voices are so important.
That's brilliant. That's such a positive note of optimism to end on as well. Kind of, that idea of finding your voice, because actually everybody's got something to contribute that, like you say, no one else will know. And I think that's what Al finds, isn't it, in his book, that he can be a part of something and he can make a difference as well to other people's lives. Absolutely,
because if you've been told for so long that you're not important or you're just part of the problem, it's very hard to feel positive about yourself. And so apart from, you know, it's both in a sense, it's for Al finding, but, you know, but in a sense, also, you know, the love and care he feels for his rats is such a positive thing. And it shows, you know, that he really can and does care. So it's that how he trusts.
He's able to share that with Laurie, isn't he, at the end? So he brings something to her, which he never thought he could.
Absolutely, and hopefully that's the start of his his emotional journey, I suppose.